Welcome to a new segment of Expert Insights hosted by the Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka. Today we have the pleasure of hosting Dr. Nagesh Kumar, the head of the South and Southwest Asia Division of UN-ESCAP. He'll be discussing the implication challenges and policy priorities in implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, commonly known as the SDGs. Dr. Nagesh Kumar, welcome to the Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka. We are privileged to have you here. And you were discussing the key policy priorities and the implementation challenges of the Sustainable Development Goals faced by Sri Lanka as well as South Asia in general. My first question is, several of South Asian countries, including Sri Lanka, have failed to achieve the MDGs that were set. How does this translate to what the SDGs have set out for us? Is there a disparity between the two agendas, or is there more overlap, and how does that work?
Well, actually, SDGs, build on the MDGs, and in fact, the first 7 goals are continuation of the Millennium Development Goals, which all the different countries in the world have achieved many of them, and South Asia can feel happy that many of the Millennium Development Goals were actually achieved, including the goal of poverty reduction. So the first 7 goals under SDGs are essentially the MDGs with a higher level of ambition. So the level of ambition now is leaving no one behind. And so, for instance, in the MDGs time, the goal was to reduce extreme poverty by 50%. Now it is elimination or end of extreme poverty.
And within those 17 SDGs, there are 169 goals set out, which will, realistically speaking, require some prioritization on part of policymakers.
Yes.
What sort of priority areas have you identified for South Asia and particularly Sri Lanka?
Yeah. Well, actually, when one goes through this list of 17 goals and 169 targets, you find that many of these goals and targets have interrelationships, which suggests that one thing is achieved if the other is also achieved. And one becomes faster if the other conditions are there. And these 7 key policy priorities include, for instance, a job-creating growth. Job-creating growth because South Asia has had good growth, relatively speaking, and currently is the fastest growing sub-region in the world. But this growth has not been generating adequate jobs, and so employment elasticity of jobs, employment elasticity of growth of South Asia has gone down over time. The second key priority would be closing the infrastructure gaps. The roads, the electricity connections, 1/3 of households in South Asia do not have access to modern electricity, modern energy. And that is not a very good situation, because many of the achievements of development goals are dependent upon access to these infrastructures, whether health or education. The third key priority would be to focus on education and health for all, or universal access to health and education, to harness the youth bulge of South Asia. Although Sri Lanka is an exception in that respect, and it has already passed through that demographic transition, but other South Asian countries need to harness this youth bulge through investments in human resource development, education and health, quality education and health care for all. Then the fourth key priority would be taking care of poverty and inequalities through extending social protection and enhancing the financial inclusion. proportion of people who do not have access to social protection is very large. Workers in informal sector, is very large in South Asia, and this needs to be addressed. And then harnessing the potential of gender equality and women's empowerment through a gender-sensitive ecosystem for women's entrepreneurship. It can unleash trillions of dollars of additional incomes, and it can be highly productive. And then being sensitive to environmental considerations, because unlike in 2000 when the MDGs were launched, there is a better appreciation of the risks of climate change and environmental and ecological damages that development and growth can bring about. So we need to integrate economic processes for growth, for production, for consumption with environmental considerations. So these are some of the key policy priorities which can help South Asia achieve these goals in an accelerated manner.
And finally, what implementation challenges will South Asian countries face with the SDGs, and how do we address them?
Yeah. Well, I think the two very critical implementation challenges which any country, any developing country, anywhere in the world has to address. One is about resources, financial resources, and the other is about technology and capacity building and all that. And in South Asia, the resource requirement for achieving these goals, especially because there are very wide infrastructure gaps to be closed, and education and health issues to be closed, social protection, staggering amounts will be needed. And the estimates that we have made at ESCAP show or suggest that it could be between 10 to 20% of GDPs which will need to be spent on achieving these goals. In money terms, it translates into $2.5 trillion of additional investments every year for Asia Pacific, and a very large part of that will be for South Asia. But fortunately, there are potentials of raising resources domestically and regionally and globally for South Asian countries. For instance, South Asian countries have very low tax to GDP ratios. And that also means that they have greater potential of raising domestic revenue and enhancing efficiency of revenue and expenditures. So this is one possibility, including by introducing innovative taxes, as some of the South Asian countries are doing, like Bhutan and Maldives have imposed green taxes, green tourist taxes. India has imposed a tax for funding the universal education and literacy program, and a recent new tax on sanitation, as new tax for sanitation, for funding sanitation program. So there are those possibilities of new and innovative taxes. Now finally, in the technology side, I think the fact that a lot of technology and knowledge is privately owned and is concentrated highly in a few advanced economies. A lot of global technology partnership, a stronger technology partnership globally would be very desirable, including facilitation of technology for developing countries like those in South Asia. And also South Asia has some strengths in frugal engineering and frugal innovation, which can be harnessed to develop low cost, low carbon products and services. And some of it can be done by pooling their resources through regional cooperation in technology. So there are many opportunities of regional cooperation for developing regional bond markets to create resources to fund infrastructure development, for instance, regional cooperation for developing affordable and low carbon products and services, and developing regional value chains for creating jobs and manufacturing sector. So there are many cooperation opportunities for South Asia, and also in terms of developing regional capacity for generating data and statistics for monitoring the achievement of these goals and targets.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kumar, and we hope to see you back at IPS soon.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you.